chord first. You guys like Andy Griffin? The Andy Griffin Show? Good. That's good. That just was a random thing. Maybe because Lyndon Johnson was president in the 60s when Andy Griffith's show came out. But we left off talking about reform policy concerning education. And I think the last thing I said was it was under LBJ's administration that the kindergarten program was started. Since kindergarten was started, they since have added preschool, right? Preschool when I was a kid in the 70s. Then when my son in the early 2000s was starting school, they had not preschool, but pre-K. Anybody go to pre-K? Nobody? You guys started right into kindergarten? And now I understand they even have a Head Start 3-year-old program. Is that true? Anybody start at age 3?
I started at 2.
2?
Yeah, because my birthday falls on September 1st.
Oh, so you got to start right before you turn 3?
Yeah.
So we'll say you had pretty much completed 3 years.
Yeah.
So, but I'm like, no, keep them home for another year at least. When my son started pre-K, he was 5 because he was born premature. And I was like, let's keep him home and just start him in kindergarten. I was like, no. But anyway, Lyndon Johnson, his administration started kindergarten. A couple of bills that might be on the test. Both of them started during, there's LBJ, and I'm assuming that's his wife, Lady Bird. I don't think that's Lady Bird though, Lady Bird Johnson. But a couple of bills started in 1965 during season 5 of Andy Griffith. Would have been the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This originally was a program that provided aid for disadvantaged students. In 2001, under George Bush Jr., it was renamed the No Child Left Behind Act. So I think it probably expanded the definition of disadvantaged students. Another act that was passed in 65, the Higher Education Act, provided Pell Grants and federal student loans for college students. Now, those of you that will be going to college, make sure you apply for Pell Grants. Pell Grants are free money. You don't have to pay back Pell Grants, but you do have to pay back student loans unless, someone help me out here, did Biden's administration pass loan forgiveness for college students? Is that right? College students today who had student loans, does anybody know if they got forgiven a couple months ago? You know, there was a lot of talk about that. We'll have to check into that. But the way that these loans were different than loans you would get at a bank, you didn't have to start paying them back until you got a job after college. And it was lower interest rate. Today, it's called the Higher Education Opportunity Act, and that was amended in 2008. Any questions on education policy when it comes to programs and curriculum and things like that? There's one more item we want to talk about, and that is school choice. It's a pretty contemporary, modern debate. Should parents, well, they already have a choice to send their kids to public school or a private school or a charter school, right? Parents technically have a choice, but private schools and charter schools cost money. Public schools are taxpayer government funded, so they're free. And usually your private schools and your charter schools are, the students that go there are usually upper middle income families that can afford it, right? So it's usually, and a lot of times it's students that are probably excelling better in their studies. So the argument from the Democrats and public school advocates is private schools and charter schools hire the best teachers because they pay more money and they get the best students who can afford it. So the debate has been, should parents be offered vouchers that would make it cheaper to send your kids to private school or charter schools? Or well, that might be the only thing, of vouchers. Now, Republicans are the ones who are pushing this, that private schools and charter schools should be a cheaper option for parents. But again, the Democrats argue it's still going to siphon the best teachers, and it's going to siphon only the upper class and upper middle class families. And it's going to hurt public schools. Less money will be diverted there. And so that is an ongoing debate with school choice. So do we want well-funded, safe, modern public schools? Or do we want well-funded, safe, modern private schools along with public schools that are not as safe and as well-funded? The argument from the right, it's your tax money, they're your children, therefore it should be your choice. Now, again, parents already have a choice, right? And the Democrats would argue, well, the lower income families really don't have a choice because they couldn't afford it. And that's true in a very strong way. And so the Republicans argue, all right, let's offer vouchers, let's offer grants or scholarships to families that would help the lower income families be able to do this. So now you might find some religious schools, or let me say that, let me rephrase that. Schools that were started by churches And I don't know if did anybody in the class ever go to a private school that was sponsored and funded by a church? No? So I'm just wondering if most of those type of schools are only for kids who go to that church, or do they offer it to kids outside of the church? And then what is their policy? Is it free for church members' kids, but kids who don't go to church, they have to pay? That might be an interesting assignment in future classes. Find some some schools that are sponsored by a church and see what the policy is. And oh, another choice is homeschooling, right? Parents who choose to homeschool, maybe they could get a grant, or they could get a voucher to get some of the tax money to help with their teaching of their own kids. Anybody here ever been homeschooled? At least some in your education years? Nobody? All right. I wonder when COVID hit, if all homeschool families were out of school those months. Any questions on education policy? Well, since we're missing almost half of our class, we won't have a Kahoot today. We'll try to end the class next week with a final Kahoot competition. Let me just briefly start foreign policy. So we'll make it to 11:30. That way we made it through at least half the class, which I think is policy for an official day of class. So just as social policy dealt with programs and regulations and legislation that dealt with domestic social issues, foreign policy would be government programs and policies in dealing with other nations. So it is our relationship, United States' relationship with other countries. And very similar to social policy, which began really strongly in the 30s. It was since World War II, early 1940s, in our case, the United States, is when our foreign policy really began to expand. And our affairs in global issues really began to increase greatly. So when our nation was founded, when George Washington finished his second term as president, in his final farewell address, he advised our government to basically not get entangled with foreign nations. And the famous quote is, let me see if I can find it real quick. All right. All righty, here we go. Oh man, come on now. Help me out here. Here we go. Well, I wanted it bigger, but you guys can see it, I think. So he said, "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." So I was wrong. He didn't say entangling alliances. He said permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. On the other hand, it was Thomas Jefferson. His quote is the one that I was thinking of. He said, "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, but entangling alliances with none." And so out of that quote by George Washington in his farewell address, as well as quotes by other founders like Jefferson and Madison, it was never an official policy, but our unspoken, unofficial policy from the beginning of our founding was, we're not going to get all entangled and involved in foreign nations and their affairs, their wars, their dealings with other nations. We're going to stay out of it. And for the first several decades of our founding, it was easy to do because where is Europe 2,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean? And that was Europe and the European nations, the Western European nations, especially England and Spain and France. Those were the world powers when we were a new nation. So it would be easy for us to stay out of their business because they're across the pond, as the saying is concerning England. And where is China and all the Middle East or the Far East nations? They're across the other pond, the Pacific Ocean, far away. And we really didn't have much knowledge of them and much business to do with them anyway. So we were isolated for our first several decades. And so our foreign policy was kind of by default, you know what? Have good relations when it comes to trading and commerce with other nations, but don't get entangled up in their business. So, all right, so we got our foot in the door for foreign policy to start next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Your final worksheet is available, and you have all the way until next Wednesday to get it done. So get all your worksheets done. You'll have access to the final chapter slides after today. And then after this weekend, we'll head into our final week together. So have a great weekend. We'll see you then.
Mr. Biggs,
Yes.
do you want our brief in MLA format?